Going live. Hi everyone. I'm Nirupam from Blue Water Photo, the underwater photography guide and Blue Water Travel. And Mark Strickland is joining me today. He is also one of our fellow Blue Water Photo Travel and Underwater Photography Guide members. And we wanted to talk about the one of the most unique and I would say underrated dive destinations in the Philippines. Um, and yeah, I guess, but before I get into that, let's see, we've got everything all ready. We had some technical difficulties, so we're gonna start with Mark. We're gonna do this presentation a little backwards and talk about the diving first. Um, but Dumaguete is it's situated in basically the southern end of the southwestern end of the Philippines on, I believe, Mark, is it Negros Island?
Yes.
Yeah. And uh it's an incredible destination where you can see both macro critters and wide angle critters all in the same time. So we're getting a little feedback. There we go. Uh, so it's unique in that it's got some of the best muck diving in the world, but it also has some of the best turtle encounters in the world and some of the healthiest corals that I've ever seen, even having been to places like Raja Ampat or Fiji. Uh, so I'm gonna let Mark show you guys a little bit about the diving. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our trip that we're doing here in July, where you can actually join Mark on an underwater photo workshop. But it's also kind of a luxury trip, so you don't have to be a photographer to go there as well. And actually, we have a lot of non-photographers who just enjoy the resort because it's one of the best resorts in the world. Now, I'll show you guys a little coupon code at the end. But I just want to remind you that by supporting our trips, by supporting us, really helps these workshops go. And we have a little gift for you guys, which is 15% off um, dive gear and then 10% off photo gear. And that's going to be at the end of this presentation. So I'll put that coupon code up there and send it to you guys over email. Another thing I wanted to mention is the reason my screen is so dark is because I'm actually on my way to drive to Beneath the Sea. So if you guys are East Coasters, come check us out, visit our booth. We'll be there this weekend in the Meadowlands Convention Center in New Jersey. So Mark, I'll let you get started.
All righty. Well, thanks, Nirupam, and thank you all for joining us. As Nirupam was saying, Dumaguete is a place with wonderful diving, and I think fair to say it's underrated, but maybe I would say rather than underrated, maybe underknown because it's just not as well known as I think it should be. But I don't think anyone who's dived there would not rate it very highly because it is one of the healthiest marine environments around and one of the most diverse. It is more critter oriented and more about unusual small creatures than otherwise. But as Nirupam was saying, there are some beautiful coral reefs nearby as well, and a great variety of things to see underwater, including little critters like this crinoid shrimp that's very well adapted to blend in with this crinoid host. And let's see here. May need to move some things around so that I can advance the show. There we go. And speaking of shrimp, there's an incredible variety just within the world of shrimp. They are like this, and some of them very well adapted to blend in with their surroundings, like this sawblade shrimp that is perched among the branches of a black coral. Imperial shrimp, which can be found on any number of different other larger organisms, in this case, a sea cucumber or sometimes other echinoderms as well, but very tiny, just maybe a maximum of an inch or so in length, and obviously very beautiful. It's also a great place for nudibranchs. And I think everyone's probably familiar with these animals. They're closely related to garden slugs, which I don't think win any beauty awards. But in the underwater world, these snails without shells are some of the most colorful and stunning animals that you may ever come across. And they come in a tremendous variety of colors, shapes, and sizes. Most of them are quite small, say an inch or less in length, but they can be found in a variety of habitats. This one usually lives on stinging hydroids, but he must be in search of another one because he's making way across the sand bottom here. Another very colorful nudibranch. This one I tend to think of as the Marilyn Monroe nudibranch because of its habit of flapping its skirt when it's irritated. So Chromodorus, a little bit bigger than some of the others, maybe an inch and a half or so in length. This one is much, much smaller. It has the popular name of Shaun the sheep, and there are several different varieties of them. This is they do exist in places other than Dumaguete, but they are found within the tropical Indo-Pacific. And I should mention that Dumaguete and the Philippines in general are within the area of the world that is known as the Coral Triangle, and it is a roughly triangular shaped huge region, actually. The Philippines being the northern tip of that triangle, Western Indonesia being to the west, and the Solomon Islands to the east. Within that triangle is considered the greatest marine biodiversity in the world. So the Philippines is within that area that has the greatest number of marine species compared to anywhere else in the world. And this little guy is at fully grown, maybe one third the size of a kernel of corn, maybe smaller than that, and so just barely big enough to see, and yet representative of some of the most beautiful and interesting creatures there. And there are other varieties of Shaun the sheep nudibranchs as well. Like most nudibranchs, it would be very difficult to find them if you were just randomly searching everywhere in the ocean, but it's all about understanding their behavior and knowing what their preferred habitat is, what food they prefer, and so on. In this case, he's found on the surface of a certain specific type of algae, on the leaves of the algae. Once you find that type of algae, it's just a matter of searching until you find one or more of these little Shaun the sheep nudibranchs. This is not exactly a nudibranch, but a cousin. It's a helmet head or a head shield slug, and also about the same size, maybe an inch or inch and a half or so in length. And he's kind of like an undersea vacuum cleaner, just cruising along, vacuuming up organic matter on the seafloor. They also come in a great variety of colors and designs. And also in the larger tribe of mollusks are the cephalopods, which are they are cousins of the nudibranchs and clams and oysters, and yet much more highly involved in some ways. Many of them are highly intelligent. This is a bobtail squid, about the size of a green pea or so. Usually they stay buried in the sand in the daytime, but they do come out at night to hunt, and that's when this one was discovered. And like all cephalopods, they're experts at changing color, sometimes even the texture of their skin, and they can do so in just the blink of an eye, at least in terms of the color patterns, by expanding or contracting the chromatophores, which are the black dots that you see here. By altering the size and shape of those, they can create a whole variety of different color patterns that flow over their body. And one of the better known of the cephalopods, the blue ring octopus. Very beautiful, also quite deadly if you were to be bitten by one. Fortunately, they're not the least bit aggressive, not at all inclined to bother a diver. If you don't mess with them, they certainly won't mess with you, but really a quite rarely seen animal. And Dumaguete is one of the few places in the world that you have a very good chance of encountering them. They don't always go around flashing their blue colors, though. Most of the time, they're very nondescript looking, just kind of a brown looking small octopus that you might not even give a second glance to if you didn't know what you're looking for. But this is a great example of the benefits of going with knowledgeable guides. And it's one of the things that Dumaguete and places like Dumaguete have to offer that make all the difference in the world for photographers, or even if you're not a photographer, just a diver who's interested in these unusual species, is by going with knowledgeable guides. They not only know the preferred habitats of these animals, they know where they were last seen. In many cases, these are their home reefs. So they likely have seen that same animal before and know exactly where to look for them. And they also share information among the different guides. So there's kind of a coconut telegraph where information is passed along that even if your guide didn't happen to see a blue ring octopus, he talks to the other guides and knows his address. So you have a far better chance of encountering all these special animals by going with a knowledgeable guide. And by the way, it's typically small groups, small ratios of divers to the guides. And these guides are not only great at finding the animals, but they're also very used to working with photographers and will oftentimes help you, get in the right position to get a good shot or point out behaviors that you might not have noticed otherwise. So it really is a great benefit.
So it's two or three per guide.
Nirupam, maybe you can speak to that. I haven't dived at atmosphere itself. I have dived Dumaguete a number of times, but
Yeah, shoot, I'm actually gonna have to look that one up and interrupt you guys again, but I believe it's like about three, maybe four per guide. That's what I remember doing, and I just did this workshop last year, but it really didn't feel crowded at all.
And the experienced photo guides are not only great at finding the animals and pointing out, good photo angles and that sort of thing, but in terms of kind of managing the photographers, many of them have become real experts at finding multiple subjects so that you rarely find yourself waiting for a subject. There might be one very special animal that's very popular, but rather than having a whole waiting line of photographers waiting to take their turn, they will go out and find one or two other secondary subjects, so to speak, but so that you can be productive and be taking photos while you're waiting your turn for the other animal, and everyone kind of rotates and takes their turn, and as a result, you rarely ever find yourself waiting in line to take a photo. But
And
fortunately, even in the situations where there may be one or two photographers in front of you, most of these animals aren't going anywhere. They're either stationary or have a relatively small territory. So as long as no one does anything to really freak them out, they're likely to stay put right in that area. And generally, they're quite cooperative photo subjects,
Mark,
including cuttlefish like this flamboyant cuttlefish, which is just a few inches in length, but like the other cephalopods, is a master at changing colors. And especially when they're hunting, you'll often see these just brilliant patterns of color flowing across their body. It's been described as the flying cloud pattern, which tends to not only put on a beautiful visual show for us, but also the theory is that it tends to mesmerize its prey into not really being as alert as they should be for their own good.
Mark, I can confirm it's maximum 4 divers per guide.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, a very, very
Thank you.
manageable number. For some reason, okay, there we go. So even though it is primarily known as muck diving, right there at the nearby dive sites at Dumaguete, and by the way, most of the dive sites are within a 5 or 10 minute boat ride from the resort, so there's very few long boat rides involved there. There is also an excellent house reef, which of course is the ultimate inconvenience. You don't even have to get in a boat, and you can be amongst beautiful marine life and great photo ops and so on. But muck diving, for those who aren't familiar with the term, it doesn't sound very enticing, but it refers to animals that live in a kind of a silty, fine sand bottom. And this, depending on where you are in the world, sometimes it's a light color sand bottom. One of the many things that I love about Dumaguete is it tends to be a darker volcanic sand, which really makes for a great photo background. But it's not strictly animals that live in the sand or the muck. There's actually a number of different habitats, even there at the nearby sites in Dumaguete, including in the shallows, healthy seagrass beds, as you see this goatfish in here. And that is not only visually a nice change from the other kinds of backgrounds and so on, but it's ecologically a very important habitat. This is kind of much like mangroves. It is kind of the nursery ground for many small animals and creatures that are not found anywhere else. And then as most of the sites also offer excellent multi-level profiles, so you can start out in the deeper areas, maybe 60, 70, 80 feet, and then gradually work your way up to the shallows. And there are great things to see at every depth level, including the safety stop level, which is typically where the seagrass beds are. There's also areas of artificial reef. And that's not that there isn't coral. There are some sections of very nice coral, but that has been supplemented over the years in areas where maybe there weren't natural coral reefs by a variety of different artificial reef ingredients that can range from maybe cement culvert pipes in some areas or other bigger structures to, in some cases, they've purposely, in some cases, you just see discarded bottles and so on, but in some cases, they've actually created the various dive resorts. They have created kind of gardens out of old bottles that are anchored in cement. And it doesn't take long before they are encrusted in corals and sponges and all kinds of colorful marine life, which in turn provides homes for fish like this saber-toothed blenny.
Thanks.
Also, plenty of colorful reef fish. And again, there are significant sections of healthy coral reef with a wide variety of coral and all the animals that you would expect to see on a typical coral reef. So a good variety of habitats, even among the nearby dive sites there. But getting into some of the more unusual creatures, I think everyone recognizes the frogfish. I think they are beautiful in their own ugly way. I don't know if everyone feels the same way about them, but they come in a great variety of colors and a number of different species for that matter, and quite a variety of sizes as well, ranging from tiny juveniles that are smaller than your fingernail to the giant frogfish, which can be nearly the size of a football or a soccer ball. Some unusual fish species, not that they're rare, but I think rarely noticed by many divers. This sand diver,
No,
and
no.
so that this is a male. Typically, you'll see one male with maybe a dozen or more females, which is his harem, and you'll see them right up at safety stop depth in the shallows. Quite difficult to get close to, but like most marine life, if you put in the time and you're patient and not aggressive, they eventually get used to your presence, and you may be able to get within photo range. This is I was fairly pleased with this shot, but it's not the shot I really wanted because every now and then these males will flare out their dorsal fins. He's flaring his ventral fins, but when they flare their dorsal fins, it's a whole different looking animal. It looks like a rooster headdress or something, and really quite spectacular. But they only do it for fleeting moments, and I didn't quite yet get that shot. So that gives me something new to shoot for on or keep trying on for this next trip.
Hey Mark, if I could interrupt you just
Yeah.
real quick. Guys, feel free to ask questions anytime. You can unmute yourselves at any time. We're getting some questions in the chat, so I just wanted to talk about that. So I had one question that says, how strong are the currents? And typically I would say that on the muck dives, you don't see much current. I had a couple of dives where current would pop up, but the conditions aren't ideal. Like it's a little silty when there's current. So most of them, there really isn't much. But once you get to Apo Island, which Mark is going to talk about, which is basically a day trip in an atmosphere, you can actually do it as many times as you want. So as a group, we usually decide, hey, we want to do it once, we want to do it twice, three times. But at Apo Island, where there's nice hard coral and turtles, there is one side of the island that's a really nice drift. But only if you're up for it. It's kind of a washing machine. So uh, as a group, because you're diving in small groups, you can always choose not to go on the current sensitive side. But if you do like current, there's some really pretty reefs, which Mark will be showing as well on that side too.
Thanks, Nirupam. And on the topic of current, while I think most of us, would rather avoid screaming current, I find that a steady current can often be a very good thing. It's certainly what makes the marine life happier. That's when everything comes out to feed, and when the soft corals look more spectacular, and so on. But even at the muck diving sites, as Nirupam said, it's seldom really strong current, but a steady current is actually a very good thing because it tends to, sometimes it's a challenge if you kick up a bit of silt or more than a bit. What you don't want is for it to just hang there in the water column and stay around. So if there's a bit of current, it actually can be quite a helpful thing. There's plenty of anemone fish there as well, a number of different varieties, including these white stripe or orange anemone fish. And one of the great advantages I find of being land-based at an area where you have the option to repeat some of the favorite dive sites is the ability to do just that. If you find something special and it's a popular subject, we certainly have the option to go back and have another look at it. And that was exactly the situation that allowed me to get this shot of, this was the first time I came across it, this orange anemone fish looking after eggs. And they typically deposit their eggs on the edge of their anemone home. And these were probably quite recently laid in this case. They look quite small and undeveloped, but I had the luxury of being able to come back about 5 days later. And here you can see they look very different. They're not only larger and darker, but if you look closely, you can actually see the eyes of the little unhatched embryos peering out at the world. And I often try to imagine what it must look like from their point of view, still within the safety of their eggs, but looking out at the big world out there that they will soon be a part of. But most fish are not especially conscientious parents. In most cases, when they spawn in midwater and eggs and sperm mingle and fertilized eggs go drifting off in the water column, and that's the end of the fish's parental duties. Not so with clownfish. They're actually very responsible as parents go, and they diligently take turns guarding the eggs and keeping them, they blow water over them and fan them with their fins to keep them oxygenated and free of parasites and keep predators away and so on, and until they actually hatch and go on their way. But just looking at some of the more unusual species here, there are quite a variety of pipefish in these waters, like these multi-band pipefish. And they're well up off the bottom, which is part of why the background is so dark, but they are also happen to be over a black sand bottom, which helps a lot. But relatives of the pipefish are the razorfish, sometimes known as shrimp fish. And you'll see these in schools like this, always in a head down position. And also in the same general family as pipefish and seahorse is the ornate ghost pipefish. And in this case, he's actually quite easily visible, but that's unusual because he's probably on his way from one habitat to another. But generally speaking, they're experts at blending in with their surroundings. And as you can imagine, if he were among the branches of a yellow and red crinoid, which is probably his preferred habitat, it would be almost impossible to distinguish. Usually found in a head down position like this. And a close relative, the robust ghost pipefish. And as you can see here, doing a great job of mimicking the blades of seagrass. And you've got the larger female imitating a healthy live seagrass blade. And the smaller male apparently got his signals crossed or maybe was hanging out amongst a different bunch of seagrass blades, but he's imitating a dead seagrass blade. And the seahorse himself, there's actually several species visible here as well, but this is one of the more common ones, the thorny seahorse, come in quite a variety of colors.
Mark,
And,
I have one more question here.
yes, thanks.
So I had a question. Are sightseers, non-photographers grouped separately? And I just wanted to mention that, at the resort, and I'll show a little bit more about the resort at the end. It's very wide open ground. And if you're going with a group that's mostly non-photographers or non-divers, or just, people that want to go for the resort, there's lots of other above water activities, which I'll get into, like rainforest hikes or going into town. Um, and yeah, I mean, you can kind of choose if you want to do that or if you want to just hang out at the resort, get a massage, or if you want to skip dives. So,
Great
uh,
point, Nirupam. And
I-
one thing I'd just like to mention in terms of my own philosophy on that, if we have non-photographers or casual photographers who don't always take a camera, first of all, you're more than welcome. I think it's the kind of trip you would enjoy. If you're interested in the marine life, then there's no reason that you wouldn't enjoy it just as much as the photographers do, because it's really about observing the marine life, whether you're carrying a camera or not. But one thing that I do ask photographers in my groups is that if we do have non-photographers diving with us, if a certain creature is encountered, to try to give the non-photographers the first chance to have a look at it, because we photographers tend to hunker down and really, spend sometimes quite a bit of time with a subject, and whereas the non-photographers are usually content to have an observation for a minute or so, but then kind of go on their way to see other things. So we do try to be considerate of those without cameras. We don't want you to feel left out, if you choose not to have a camera on a trip like this.
and speaking of being left out, I had one question. Can I book as a solo diver? And I would say, of course. We're happy to find you guys buddies if you don't have buddies normally. And it's a great trip for solo travelers as well. We're all kind of there to make friends. So, and there is availability. I had a question about if there's availability on the trip. Yes, we have availability this summer on June 29 to July 6. So, Mark, I'll go ahead and give the floor to you.
Okay, great. Another one of my favorite animals, the ribbon eel. They actually have a fascinating natural history for those who are not familiar with them. They start out, I don't have the whole color range in this particular slideshow, but they start out life as a black and yellow juvenile of undetermined sex. And that at a certain size and age, they all turn into males, like this one, that are all electric blue and yellow, which I think are the most attractive color phase, spend most of their life as adult males, like this one. But then only the relative few that live long enough to get towards the end of their life cycle they all turn into females and become solid yellow. So there's a possibility of seeing any or all three color phases on this trip. In fact, the adult yellow ones are quite rarely seen because it's such a small portion of the whole life cycle. But I did see one there at Dumaguete the last time I was there.
The best cars for the money are Hondas. Drive the best today. All Hondas inside.
Another kind of a special fish, and a special type of dive is the mandarin fish. And for those who are not familiar with them, they're obviously just spectacular little fish. They're a maximum of maybe an inch and a half or 2 inches in length, but they're quite reclusive, normally not seen during the daytime or even on regular night dives. But the one time that they come out and show themselves is right at dusk. And so it's a kind of a specialized dive if you go for the mandarin fish. Only certain dive sites, typically those with shallow branching corals. But the idea is everyone kind of takes their places in an area that is known to be a home for mandarin fish. And as dusk approaches, you'll start to see them down amongst the branches of the coral, with typically the males kind of scooting around, courting the females. And generally, the females are pretty standoffish, and they go through all the motions of courtship. They're kind of down under the coral branches. But as it gets closer to dark, they oftentimes get in the mood, I guess, and start moving closer and closer together. And then at some point, if things go right, they will get together like this and go kind of cheek to cheek and actually hover up above the corals, kind of like helicopters lifting off of the reef, and up to as much as maybe 12 or 15 inches above the coral, in a slowly ascending, kind of like a helicopter rising embrace. Until this, in the blink of an eye, they release eggs and sperm and spawn, and it's all over with in just the blink of an eye. And they're immediately back down in the coral, and the moment is over. So it's kind of a tricky photo op, but a nice challenge to have. And when you do get it right, again, the results can be spectacular. So this is a dive that is an option for any of the evenings there, but typically we kind of decide as a group, if there's interest in doing a mandarin fish dive. And it doesn't mean that everyone has to do it, but it's not something that is part of a normal night dive. But I'd say very much worth doing, especially for those who haven't seen them before. They are shy, so this is a great reason to have a focus light on your camera rig that has an optional red beam, because otherwise they may be frightened away by the white light. This brings us to another portion of the trip. This is Apo Island. Now, even though the majority of the dives will be doing near shore there in Dumaguete proper on the mainland, which is all the kind of unusual small animals that we've been seeing up until now, Apo Island is quite different. It's also quite a bit more distant. So it's the only dive site that is any real distance from the resort. And because of that, we take a larger, more comfortable boat and make a day of it. So it's rather than like the nearby dive sites would typically come and go from each dive, we return to the resort and regroup, get some refreshments or whatever, or lunch as the case may be, and then head out for the next dive. But for Apo Island, we do spend the day out there aboard the larger, more comfortable boat. And this is a view of Apo Island as we're approaching. Apo is it's a small, relatively small island. You could walk around it in probably an hour or so, I guess. But it's a great example of true ecotourism, and it's a real success story in that regards. I think the best examples of ecotourism are where it's not just a policy that is imposed upon the locals, but rather to have any chance of succeeding wherever you are in the world. It really has to be a situation where the locals are on board and with the program, and that is very much the case at Apo Island. The local islanders there, and there are I don't know exactly what the population is. It's a small population, but they do live there full time, and the residents get it. They understand that if they allow the goose that lays the golden egg, which is the healthy coral reefs, to wither away or be damaged, that is also going to be the source of their livelihood. Now they do fish certain areas. It's subsistence fishing, so very low tech, low impact fishing in the areas that they do fish. But they also have strict no take zones, which are marine sanctuaries, and these are kind of scattered around the island. And I'd say a high percentage of the coral reefs there are protected, and it is self-policing. The locals enforce the regulations, and they understand that if they fish in the protected areas, pretty soon divers won't come there anymore. And tourism, I'd say, is a bigger source of their livelihood than the fish that are there to be caught. So it is again a very encouraging example of how it can actually work in terms of a win-win situation between diving tourism and subsistence fishing and the local well-being. Probably a dozen or more different dive sites scattered around the island. Obviously, we want to have a chance to visit all of them, but we will get a good sampling. Now, Nirupam mentioned that there's a possibility of coming to Apo Island more than once during the trip. I certainly won't rule that out, although my inclination generally is to spend one day at Apo Island and the other 4 diving days. It'll be a total of 5 diving days on the 7-day workshop that we're offering. And I find that in terms of logistics and also the kind of photo ops and so on, that it generally makes more sense to spend the majority of our time at the local reefs at Dumaguete. But if there's a strong consensus to do otherwise, we want to do our best to make the majority of people as happy as possible. So and certainly willing to be flexible about that. But it's a very different kind of diving environment than the nearshore reefs in Dumaguete. Generally speaking, better visibility and quite a different underwater environment as well. This is the view from one of the Banca dive boats there and looking at one of the villages there on Apo Island. And another view of these, the dive boats, kind of unusual looking as dive boats go, but they actually work surprisingly well. It's an outrigger design, as you can see, with one main hull and 2 kind of steadying outriggers. But the result and the benefit of having those outriggers is they are extremely stable. And they also, it allows having a huge amount of deck area rather than being confined to just the width of a normal monohull boat. It's almost like a floating tennis court. Now, this particular boat is a, kind of a medium-sized example, but some of the bigger ones really are that big. And so there's plenty of elbow room, plenty of shade, and they're very much self-contained. Of course, have a bathroom on board as well as a usually a barbecue grill and galley. And generally speaking, although it probably varies from one operation to another, but the trips that I've been on there, they actually prepare lunch on board, barbecue lunch on board, and it's delicious food. And what a setting for lunch in between dives. But of course, the main reason we're there is for the diving. And as I mentioned, it's quite a different habitat than what you see close to shore. Primarily hard coral, and some really stunning examples of it with huge, healthy table corals like this. Other areas, fields of branching corals, and a very high percentage of live coral, which is something that sadly is not such a common thing in a lot of areas these days. Also, plenty of marine life, including marine reptiles like sea turtles. In particular, hawksbill turtles are very common there. And because they see divers all the time, they're generally very nonchalant and approachable, usually not the least bit bothered by divers, and so generally very approachable for photo ops. It's also a great place for sea snakes, like this banded sea crate. And for those who aren't familiar with them, they do have a potentially deadly venom, but fortunately, they are the most mild-mannered creatures in the world. They are not the least bit inclined towards biting anyone. I've even watched 1 or 2 idiot divers over the years trying their best to get bitten by a sea snake, and the snake would not oblige them. So they're absolutely not a threat, but a real highlight to encounter. There's also, while again, the majority of the reef there is hard coral, there are some very colorful areas, especially along some of the deeper ridges and drop-offs and so on. One dive site in particular, where the underside of these ledges are just covered with orange cup corals. In this case, there's not much current, so the cup corals are closed, but even when they're closed up, they're obviously still very colorful. Also, lots of crinoids or feather stars and some nice encrusting sponges as well. So this is a close focus wide angle shot. Not all of it is deep. This is actually up quite shallow. I'd say only 30 feet or less near the top of one of those ridges. So there are some nice examples of colorful corals there as well as the hard corals. Yeah, but this is more typical of the reef top there. Also, the terrain makes for excellent multi-level profiles. There are nice things to see at depth, but also in the shallower depths as well. So you can get perfect multi-level dives, great stuff to see at every depth level, and photo ops at every depth level as well, including right up to safety stop depth. And as you would expect with any healthy coral reef, an excellent variety of colorful tropical fish like this regal angelfish, this clown triggerfish, just a few of many examples. And some of them very tiny, like this little red-eye hovering goby, just perched on top of a branching coral. So among the tiniest fish, but also on this trip, there's a possibility of the largest fish of all, the whale shark. Whale sharks are not commonly seen at Apo or at the nearby reefs at Dumaguete. However, there is an excellent opportunity for them on the last day of the trip when we're not going to be scuba diving on the very last day because of off-gassing considerations. But while we're off-gassing, you might as well be swimming with some amazing marine life. So there is an option. You could either stay at the resort and snorkel at the house reef, or do other activities, or just relax and enjoy the spa. Or the optional trip for the whale sharks does involve quite a bit of travel. We take a mini bus and then catch a ferry to another island, and then another mini bus to a very popular attraction which specializes in whale shark encounters. Now, it's not for everyone. It is not a totally natural situation in that the locals do feed the whale sharks, so you could look upon it as kind of a contrived situation, which it is. But on the other hand, I think from, again, an ecotourism standpoint, it's certainly preferable to what used to happen at the same location, which is the harpooning and killing of whale sharks. That's what used to happen here. But I think a great improvement in recent years. The locals have realized that these animals are worth more alive than they are dead, and have really embraced a version of ecotourism. Now, it is kind of a mass tourism approach, so nothing personalized about it, but it still can be, I think, a great experience depending on your expectations. But it is quite organized and regimented. You have 30 minutes, not more, not less, in the water with the whale sharks. And the reason that they show up here so regularly is that the fishermen net some small krill that is their natural food. So there's nothing unnatural in terms of the diet for the whale sharks. There have been studies done. It doesn't hurt the animals. It does not make them permanently dependent on handouts. They've studied this and found that it's not the same whale sharks from week to week. They pass by here in part of their normal migration and just stop in and hang out for a few days of free meals and then go on their way, kind of thing. So I think by and large, in terms of the whale shark population, it's a very good thing, and it also offers a nearly guaranteed opportunity to get up close and personal with the whale sharks. And in this case, we are seeing you can actually see the small krill that they're feeding them. Fisherman throws a net full of them over the side, and generally speaking, you can get just about as close as you want. There's no touching them, and basically it's a matter of letting the animals come to you. But the locals who run the operation are quite expert at throwing the bait near the snorkelers, and it is snorkeling only, by the way, not scuba diving. But again, it can be some excellent photo ops, and a pretty cool experience. There's also a little educational section where they explain about the natural history of the animals and so on. It is a full day and kind of a long day, but for those who have never encountered a whale shark before and would love to do so, it's an almost guaranteed opportunity.
Mark, we did have one question, which is
Yeah.
how likely is it to get a photo of a whale shark like this without 15 people in the frame?
Good question. I'd say it's a challenge at times, but quite possible. This is I ended up with a handful of shots like this within the 30 minutes that we were allowed and I don't know how typical. I've only done this once, but it's even though there's a mass of people there on the location, there's only like one or two of those small boatloads full of people at any given time with any given animal. And it's often more than one animal. It's quite often two or three whale sharks that are sort of making the rounds and rotating and so on. And they're quite strict about it's not people snorkeling all around in all directions, in which case you would always have other people in the shot. But they wisely insist that the snorkelers stay right up next to the boat that took you out there and shoot outwards away from the boat. So the only problem I had with people in my photos were the guides themselves, the in-water people who were in charge. Sometimes were in the photo, but certainly not all the time. So that's, again, it's a cool experience and an option that you may want to consider on the last day, which is a non-diving day anyway. But keep in mind that's not really what the Dumaguete experience is all about. It's much more about fascinating, colorful, small animals that are very approachable generally and great photo subjects. And again, just a great variety of animals and photo ops, as well as some beautiful scenery, in particular at Apo Island. This is at Apo Island at depth, and it's kind of a continuation of the same reef that we saw earlier there. So
And
not a lot in the way of actual soft corals, and yet some very colorful clusters of orange cup corals and crinoids, and plenty of colorful reef fish as well.
that's the section of the reef that I was talking about that has the drift at Apo.
Which is why there's such colorful marine life there. If
Yep.
you find a place that never has current, generally speaking, the scenery is not going to be very good. So
Yep.
I'm a big fan of current, and this is the kind of scenery you can see in those places. So, guys, that's all the images I have to share with you. But as we've been mentioning, again, we do have it's always a good time to visit Dumaguete, but in particular, as a photographer, I'm a big believer in the advantages of joining a photo workshop like we're offering. And we generally have photographers of all experience levels, ranging from complete beginners to very accomplished photographers. And I think that all of those people can benefit from the type of workshops that we run, because it's small enough groups that we can cater to individual needs and experience levels and so on. And even for those who are very accomplished, I think there's a big advantage to being among a group of other underwater photographers, and that we have similar goals in terms of the choices of dive sites and kind of our approach to things. For anyone who, as a photographer, if you've ever been on a regular guided underwater tour where the guide's only real objective is to go from point A to B to C to D to E at a steady pace and back to the anchor line and boom, 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 ship them and dip them kind of approach, it's a good way to maybe see quite a bit of different marine life, but it's very frustrating from a photographic standpoint because you're often being hurried along. You either have a choice to be left behind or to, just take a quick snapshot of an animal and then continue on to the next thing. That is not going to be our approach. And that's something I think is very important that distinguishes our photo-oriented trips from typical dive trips and guided tours, is that we do place a high emphasis not only on the photography, but even for the non-photographers on the quiet observation of the marine life. And this is not only how you get your best images, but also how you get to see cool and unusual behavior and really get to know the animals. And to me, that's one of the biggest rewards of this type of diving, is not only the images that result from it, but the time that you spend with the animals and the insights that you get from this kind of an experience.
So thank you, Mark, for your part. Like I said, guys, I think we're actually going to be doing a little bit of the opposite with this one, just because we didn't want to lose Mark's photos. We're having some technical difficulties, so once we got him on, we were going to go ahead with them. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the resort and about some of the technical questions that you guys have had. We've been having a good chat online here. And Mark, if you, in case I'm not sure if I heard you say it, but if you do want to book this trip, you just email us at trips@bluewaterdivetravel.com. And yeah, I'm gonna first cycle through some of these questions that we've gotten. Feel free to add more to the chat, or to interrupt me for a Q&A, and then I'll kind of show you guys the resort and talk about how I pack for the trip, how I travel for the trip, and all of that good stuff. And like I said, I've got a special coupon code as well at the end of all this. So let me take over screen sharing here. And I'm going
Shall I
to,
stop the share, or you got it from your end?
yes, and I believe I have it. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now I can share my screen, which is perfect, but let me open up the chat so I can go through everybody's questions. All right, so the first question, what is a good round trip airfare price from LA going for? So from LAX to Dumaguete, there's a few options. I think I've got some photos that will, so I just want to go, here we go. I just want to show you guys where Dumaguete is. So it's in the southwestern portion of the Philippines, and you can see it. Yeah, sorry, I kind of positioned the Philippines up at the top of the Coral Triangle. But to get there, I recommend going from LAX or another major West Coast hub to Manila or Cebu. And if you go to Cebu, often there's a layover, so you're ending up having to do two layovers. So usually Manila is the best place to go, and then you can fly directly to the airport in Dumaguete. And that round trip flight should cost about these days, I would say 1,200 to 1,500 round trip. Now that can vary quite a bit, and I usually recommend booking flights about 2 or 3 months before. I had a lot of questions about the airline, what airline is best. Often Philippine Airlines has the best route. So if you want a direct flight to Manila, if you want an easy route, then that's often going to be the best airline. But in terms of service, quality, just better airlines, Singapore Air, Eva Air, and there was one more in our chat that I'll mention as well when I get down to it. Those are all better airlines, but you might have more layovers. Now, the Philippine Airlines offers two 50-pound bags for international flights. If you book through all the way to Dumaguete in one booking, then you can have that luggage allowance all the way through. However, if you book in two separate bookings and you take a domestic flight from Manila to Dumaguete, you don't get that luggage allowance. So make sure you book it all the way through. I learned that the hard way. And their luggage allowance for domestic flights is a lot worse. Now the carry-on can be kind of tricky because often they want you to have 15 pounds on the carry-on, and that can be tricky to pare down, right? And what I usually do is I'll put my camera inside of the housing, and then I'll just I'll take my strobes because my strobes are pretty sturdy, my arms and clamps, my ports. I'll wrap those up and put them in my dive gear bag. And it ends up actually being pretty close to about 15 pounds. And I keep it going pretty well that way. But Mark actually has a pretty cool tip. Mark, what's your tip for paring down that weight?
Well, I think everyone's gear is a bit different, so there are different strategies depending on your setup. But I think in general, take as much of your camera kit on board as carry-on as possible. And for those who are not ridiculous like me, and I travel with two big DSLR systems and take them both carry-on, which really is making life difficult. But nonetheless, I'm glad once I arrive with my two cameras. But for those traveling with a single camera system, as much as possible, use a maximum allowable size rollaway bag like the think tank bags. And in most cases, you can get the housing, as Nirupam said, camera inside the housing, but you put your housing, strobes, spare port, whether you have a wide angle port, or I usually travel with a wide angle port attached to the housing, but that will vary depending on your system and so on. But and that way, if the airlines lose or delay your checked bags, you're going to have, wherever you go, including the Philippines, they're going to have clothing and they're going to have dive gear if need be, if your bags don't arrive. But they're very likely not going to have the photo gear you need. So as much as possible, try to take it all carry on. But because it is almost impossible to stay under that 15 pounds allowable carry-on weight, which I have to admit I rarely ever do, but that's kind of a different discussion. But in an effort to stay close to that allowable weight, the not so secret weapon that I'm a big believer in is a photographer's vest. And this can make all the difference. I'm sure you guys have seen them, sometimes known as travel vests or sportsman's vests, but it's a usually heavy-duty canvas vest with lots of big zipper pockets. And in those pockets, you can travel with an incredible amount of equipment. Sometimes I'll have 30 or 40 pounds of gear, of batteries and hard drives and lenses and things that are small and or delicate and or heavy, that would otherwise make my main rollaway carry-on way over the weight limit. But it's a wonderful loophole that I hope the airlines never close, that unlike a backpack, which you wear but counts as one of your items, you wear the photo vest, but apparently it's considered clothing, so it does not count against you, no matter how heavy it is. And of course, once you're on the plane, you just put it in the overhead bin, and it's not like you have to wear this uncomfortable heavy vest throughout the flight, but it allows you to get on the plane with the gear that you need.
Yeah, and we just found out we can actually start selling those vests at Blue Water Photo. So keep your eye out for photographer's vests. We're getting them on the website. And Mark, what was the brand name of that? Was it
It's Domke, I think, is
Donkey?
but it is made by, is it
Tiffin.
Tiffany?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Tiffin, the filter brand. So that was kind of interesting. Um, All right, so going through some other questions. Is it best to fly to Manila or Cebu? I kind of answered that. I like Cebu a little better than Manila. The airport's a little nicer. So for me, doing a layover in Taiwan, going to Cebu is fine. But typically, yeah, you want to fly to Manila. The one exception is there's a really cool route that you can do in an add-on if you come talk to us, which is to go to Bohol. And I really love that route because you can take a ferry from Cebu to Bohol. And there's some great diving there. It's a lot quieter. It's a good mix of muck and reef. And then you can take another ferry to Dumaguete. So that's what I did last time, and it was a lot of fun. Okay, so going through some of these other questions. We talked about packing. We talked about Oslob. ANA Air is another one that was mentioned as being a good airline. Do we require advanced cert? We don't require advanced cert for this trip, and most dives, you can stay above 60 feet if you want. There are some good stuff a little bit below 60 feet, so if you can get deep diving certified, it's a little better because sometimes you will see subjects down there, but it's definitely not required. We have a question: what photo gear, uh, lens, etc. would you recommend bringing? So because you have Apo Island and because you have all that muck, I recommend everything you can bring. So if you can bring a 100mm macro lens, I think that's great. So like a longer macro lens. If you have a crop sensor camera, that might be a 60. If you can get a wet diopter, then you can shoot super macro and you can go for really small frogfish because sometimes the frogfish are only the size of a penny or a quarter. So I recommend that. I recommend creative photography equipment like snoots, colored video lights. One of the fun ones that I do is I bring some steel wool and I put a toothpick through it and I put that behind my subject for some nice bokeh. So that's something I would bring. And magic tubes are a lot of fun. All of those you can find on Blue Water. Feel free to reach out to me too if you have any questions about that. Nirupam at uwphotographyguide.com. And yeah, and then in terms of wide angle lenses, I think a fisheye is best for Apo Island if you can, because the turtles you can be really close to them and you get a lot of nice, pretty coral. So a fisheye is probably my favorite lens over there. What's with the steel wool? Okay, so that's a good question there. Yeah, I'm gonna add my email to the chat right here. Sorry guys, just 1 second. So the steel wool is reflective material, and if you get one that doesn't rust, what I do is I put a toothpick through it and I actually stand it in the sand behind a subject, and you can get really interesting reflections in bokeh. And I know this is kind of going off script here, but I'm happy to share with you guys what this looks like. So let me stop sharing and then I'll reshare here. Okay. And this is the steel wool effect. So you get this nice bubbly bokeh behind the subject, and you can see a tiny little frogfish there. I think I might have a couple other shots like that. Here we go. So here's another steel wool shot. So you get like really circular bokeh, and then you can get some interesting colors if you take color lighting and you shine it over there. So that's my aside before I get back to the resorts. Okay, I'm gonna share this again. All right. Let's see. I've got some more questions here. Okay, cool. All right, so back to the resort. I just want to show you guys some photos of how the resort's laid out. It's one of the best resorts I've ever been to. I've been lucky that I've been able to go to some of the top resorts in the world, including Wakatobi, Amanini, and Atmosphere. And between those three, it's really hard for me to decide which one I like best. So it really is incredible. The staff are really friendly. And it's pretty amazing. The value for money in terms of resorts, I think, is the best value for money that I've ever gotten at a resort. And the food is incredible too, which is really important when you're diving all the time. But this is the main pool. And these are some of the boats that Mark was talking about. Probably the only one downside that some people have trouble with is you do have to climb up this ladder to get to the boat. Now, the guys at the resort will actually hold railings for you. And so they'll hold the railings up and then you climb up using those railings. If you're not comfortable with that, they do have a smaller boat that is a speedboat, and then you can use that as well. But this is you can see it's kind of dark black volcanic sand, so that's what makes the photography so compelling in Dumaguete. It's that dark sand, and that's the shore, like the main house reef. So you can see the entry is really easy. And one of the cool things about it is that they've actually had crews from Blue Planet and National Geographic filming the little subjects on the house reef because it's so easy to do that. You can actually upgrade to an unlimited package. If you don't want to dive with us, that's totally fine. You can dive the shore reef all day long, and I've had divers in our group do 5 to 6 dives in a day easily, just doing the shore reef, which is great. That's just a happy diver I had in there. And this is another view of Apo Island from the surface, where you can see just how clear and blue and pretty the water is with the coral. And this is the part of the island where all the turtles hang out. So you can see there's kind of coral in the water, and you go from stand to stand and you just see turtle after turtle after turtle. Mark, did you have any turtle photos in your presentation?
Yep.
You did? Cool. So this is the main pool again. They've got a really nice restaurant area and bar right there. And then here's the restaurant. The food is absolutely incredible. There's a lot of options, and they have specials every night. And gosh, between the food there, Wakatobi, and the Rocio del Mar, it's kind of hard for me to decide which is the best. I think Atmosphere kind of edges them out a little bit. It's gourmet, and it's really, really good. The rooms are really big and spacious. They're bungalow style, and some of them even have pools, which is really, really nice. So, if you're traveling with a family, you can fit a lot of people in a bungalow. There's the view of the main pool again, from the bar, and the view of the kitchen. I think this is the room that I stayed in. You can see they have patios as well. And then you can see this is one of the huts with the pool. Every room has an outdoor shower, which just takes some getting used to. But it's also kind of nice as well. And I wanted to end the presentation with, like I said, little coupon code. So it's HUPS dive at checkout for 15% off dive gear, and HUPS photo at checkout at Blue Water Photo for 10% off photo gear. Now, if anybody else has any questions, we have an open Q&A. And yeah, I'm happy to answer those. I'll answer what's in the chat, or just feel free to interrupt. I'll try to take a look at Facebook as well, where this is being live streamed, and see what questions you guys have. So I have one question. What's the name of the resort? So that's Atmosphere Resort and Spa. That's who we're partnering for this trip in the summer. We can book you guys anytime, individually as well, if you don't want to, book with the group, or you need to go at another time, at info@bluewaterdivetravel.com. So let's see. I have a question. If you're booking as a single but get a buddy match, is the rate still double occupancy? I'm gonna have to get back to you on that question. If you don't mind, I put my email in the chat, so go ahead and send me that question in an email, and yeah, I'll get back to you with that as well, and I'll send it to some of our other organizers that are organizing Dumaguete. Cool. I'm just grabbing that. Okay. Let's see here. I'm gonna try to move over to Facebook to see if anybody put questions in there. Don't believe so. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for me? Feel free to interrupt or unmute yourselves.
I have a
Nirupam,
comment. Is that okay? Oops.
oh, sorry, this is Malada. I just have a quick question. So I just want to know, does Mark recommend that photographer's vest over like a travel vest?
I think they're two different names for the same thing, basically. It's the criteria that I would look for is large pockets with sturdy closures. So I would stay away from Velcro, but prefer sturdy zippers. And most of them have lots of small pockets, and that's fine too, but I definitely would want to see at least one big pocket on each side. Some of them have a pocket in the back as well, which obviously wouldn't be comfortable if you wouldn't want to go through a whole plane flight sitting with it that way. But that's not the idea. The idea is just to get you and your gear on the plane until you have a chance to take it off.
And they've never hassled you over it?
Never once.
That's good. Okay, thank you.
Sure thing. And for those who, in my case, I travel with so very much gear, I have to load it up, just to, get on the plane with all my stuff. But for many or most traveling photographers who don't have so much volume of heavy equipment, many of them, you might find that it's kind of borderline in terms of the weight of your rollaway bag. Maybe it's just a few pounds or over. Most of the time I find they don't make you put it on the scale to begin with, and it's never an issue. But it is important, I think, to always have a contingency plan. If you happen to get, a ticket agent with, a very strict attitude, you want to have a plan B and a plan C. So that's where, even if you're not sure that you need the vest, if nothing else, travel with an empty vest, either wear it or have it among your carry-on things, so that if you get hassled, you can pull it out and go, okay, typically they'll ask you, can you, do some repacking to lighten up your main carry-on? And sure, yep, no problem. That's when you pull out the vest and load it up.
And did I hear you say you recommend just a small size roll-on suitcase, like a tiny one?
Well, in my case, my philosophy is, and again, I travel with a lot of stuff, but even if I didn't, I think you're only allowed one main carry-on item. So why wouldn't you want it to be the maximum allowable size? So, and I find that even if I don't occupy every square inch of it right away, that there's always, there may be some snacks or a jacket or something that, it's nice to have a little extra space in there. So that would be my approach, would be to get the maximum allowable size for carry-on travel. But if you have a truly minimal size system, GoPro or a little TG6 or something like that, we do sell smaller versions of that, of these either rollaway or backpack style bags, and there are people who find that that's adequate. So if you can get away with that, smaller volume, then more power to you. And that's, there are some puddle jumper planes. I don't think that they will be required for Dumaguete. Even the connecting flight from Manila is still a full size, like 737 or something. But there are some destinations in the world where you might be on a much smaller plane, where that smaller bag would be preferable.
I believe somebody said they had a comment, but
Yeah, hi Nirupam, it's Lynn Gastia.
how's it going?
Good, how are you? I'll see you
Good.
this weekend. We're gonna head to Beneath the Sea.
Oh,
But my
awesome.
comment was about the solo travelers.
Yeah.
Last year, I traveled solo. I spent a week at Crystal Blue and then another week here at Atmosphere. And I agree with you. It was probably one of the top 3 resorts I've ever been at. And it didn't matter if you were solo or had a buddy. They cater to you. They will either find you a buddy or you'll just dive with your guide. I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. I totally agree. It's one of the best resorts in terms of just service, and they really look after you. So
Right. And I was a female solo traveler and I had no issues, no problems. It's a very safe area. It's all the resort is gated, so you don't have to worry about that. They have guards. It's probably one of the safest places I've ever been, actually. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that at all.
yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Great. Any other questions, comments, anything else? Okay, that looks like everything. Well, thank you guys so much for attending. It was a pleasure having all of you this evening. Like I said before, if you're in the East Coast and you're in the New York area, Beneath the Sea is happening, so it'd be great to see you. Otherwise, have a great rest of your evening, and thank you, Mark, for showing so much of your beautiful work.
Well, it's my pleasure, and great to see all you guys. Hope to see some of you in Dumaguete.
Great. All right. Bye, everyone.
Have a good
Bye,
night. Thank
thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.